Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Called to Love podcast, where we discuss all things adoption and foster care and dive into the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical perspectives to help you and your family thrive. I'm Summer Colbert, adoptive mom, director of adoption and foster ministry, and champion for the Arkansas Baptist Children and Family Ministries. Adoption and foster care aren't just a process. They are both unique invitations to go on a journey with the Lord, where you will experience life-changing opportunities to grow in your faith and learn to love in an entirely new way. One thing is for sure, being called to love means you will never be the same. Welcome back, families, to the Call to Love podcast, where each week we dive into a topic related to the practical, the clinical, but always the biblical aspects of the adoption and foster care calling for Christian families. Today, I am excited to welcome back to the show Tori Hope Petersen. Tori has an amazing story of hope and overcoming that I am so excited to have her share. And specifically, we're going to lean into the topic related to her upcoming book, Breaking the Patterns That Break You. This discussion is going to center around destructive patterns, how to recognize and overcome them, and then advice for us as Christian foster and adoptive parents as we navigate how to love and steward our children who might be stuck in these destructive patterns. I'm so excited. Welcome, Tori. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. I always like to begin our conversations just by allowing our listeners to get to know my guests. And you are just such a delight. We've been able to meet and speak before. And your story is incredible, related to just your childhood and where the Lord has brought you to where you are working in this space of just as an advocate, as an author, so many different things to pack in. I don't want to steal your thunder. I want them to hear from you. Share with us a little bit about your story.
Oh, thank you so much. I was born to a single mom who had a lot of childhood trauma herself. And I will say to the day that I die that she did the absolute best with what she had. And she just did not have the resources that I have had available to me. She didn't have the church community that I have had access to. And so, unfortunately, she passed some of those generational curses and generational cycles down to me. And I entered the foster care system for the first time when I was 4 years old, was reunited with my mom, and then went back into the foster care system again when I was 12. And I moved throughout 12 different foster homes, which was very, very challenging, made me feel very unloved and very disposable. You know, I think we've all felt disposable at times, but in foster care, I really was disposable. I could be kicked out of people's house at any point, or people could not want me at any point. And I really wanted a family. I really wanted a home. I really wanted stability. I think it was equally people didn't want me, and as much as I didn't know how to be in a family. And so I aged out of foster care the day I turned 18, and like 20% of foster youth who do that, I was instantly homeless. I was bouncing around from home to home, and I had some pretty incredible people in my life who stuck with me, mentored me, loved me. And my track coach actually ended up bringing me into his family, his daughters. He was in my life as my track coach for 3 years, and his daughters went to him and said, "Oh, why isn't Tori just living with us?" And now they are my sisters, and he is my dad, and he's who my kids call Grandpa. Yeah.
That's so incredible. I love that. And there's so many more things. Like, she's being very humble with her other accomplishments and things that she's been able to experience in life. I'm not going to let you share that if you feel led to, but all of that, it perfectly explains why you have such a heart and a passion to do what you do and to be an advocate, and leaning into specifically what we're talking about today, which is those destructive patterns. And you mentioned generational sin, those generational struggles that we have, and how that can often be inherited and become our own struggle that can potentially be passed down and affect all of those that we interact with. And so when did you, Tori, I'm curious, just become aware of your own self-destructive patterns, or just those patterns that were breaking you and the relationships around you in your life?
So when I look back on my time in foster care, I do remember people saying that I was like a self-sabotager, and I do remember people saying I was manipulative. But here's the thing, I don't think that I was then. I don't think, like, that was not I just was in survival mode. Um,
Right.
those things were spoken over me, but I did not recognize those patterns. And even looking back as a kid, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have labeled that. I wouldn't have labeled it like I wasn't trying to be destructive. And I just think when we label kids like that, it's very differently. It's so different. Like when you're an adult and you can recognize your patterns, then you can be like, okay, that's destructive. But I don't think there's any benefit or help in labeling kids that way and
Right.
labeling youth that way, just because, like, typically for me, I was functioning out of a survival mode.
Sure.
If I was appearing manipulative or sabotaging, I was usually doing it because I wanted to feel loved, accepted, because I
Yeah.
wanted to be in a family. Um, but then as an adult, I continued to just have patterns in my life. A lot of it revolved around relationships, where relationships in my life seem to be very, very challenging. And, when that happens over and over and over again, I think it comes to a point you have to ask, what is happening? Like, why is this happening? Um, there was one Christmas where my husband and we were organizing presents for just a bunch of people in our families and a bunch of people in our community. And my husband has a big family. I have a lot of families through foster care and adoption. And then we're very involved in our community, whether that's through foster care or volunteer work. And so we're just organizing all these presents for people. And there was this woman in my life. I really wanted her to be my mother figure. I really wanted her to accept and love me. And I just poured a lot into that relationship, even though it was not like the best, healthiest relationship. And so, like, the nicest gift in all of these presents was probably there was this leather bag, leather like purse, book bag thing. And I put it in this woman's pile who I really wanted to be my mother figure. And my husband, he just like stopped me and he was like, you have given her all of the nicest gifts. Like, why don't you give this to your mother figure, whose name is Tanya, who is one of those people who was just there for me, loved me, pursued me. I could call her literally right now and she would answer, and she would be on this podcast if I asked her to. Like, she would drop everything for me, and she's always been like that. And he was like, "You need to give this to your mother figure. She would love it. She wouldn't get anything like this for herself, and you're just not giving nice things to your family." And I was like, kind of offended. I was like, what do you mean I'm not giving nice things to my family? Yes, I am. And there it was, right? Like, it was all laid out in front of me. So I had to look at it and I actually had to face it.
Mm.
And, I moved the presents around. I'm like, yeah, my family probably hasn't gotten the best gifts throughout these years compared to everyone else, community, the other parts of our family. And what I recognized as I reflected on that more and more was that I tended to reject the people that accepted me and accept the people that rejected me, pursue the people who couldn't really express love to me in the way that I needed to. And then the people who did express love to me, those were the people that I would kind of run away from. And, you know, I think it was so incredible that I had to, like, it was almost like like, I wish that everyone could do that. Like, lay out valuable things in your home and ask yourself, who does this belong to? And then ask yourself, do your relationships actually, the way that you pursue them and love those people, and the way that those people pursue you and love you, does it actually reflect that? And this is like, as Christians, we are meant to love hard people. But I don't think that as Christians, we are supposed to reject and turn away those who continually love and pursue us. And I do think that this is a pattern, right, in the foster care and adoption world, of
Yeah.
children who have grown up, who have experienced abandonment, abuse, and neglect by their original caregivers. And I wouldn't have recognized that pattern in my life if it wasn't for my husband who called it out. And I don't even like to use the term called it out. He called me up, right? He was like,
Yeah.
he called me up and out of this pattern that was actually really destructive, because there were, I think about my track coach, Tanya, these people in my life who were there for me, and I didn't treat them the way that they deserved to be treated. I really neglected those relationships for the sake of relationships that reflected, ones that looked like the ones my relationship with my caregiver, because I
Yeah.
thought if I can make these people love me, then maybe I'll really be lovable. But these people over here, they'll always love me, and they just love easily. So it doesn't mean I'm truly lovable. So I have to make these people love me, who it's kind of hard for them to love me, because then that'll mean I'm truly lovable. And so
Yeah.
I had to address these patterns, one by actually reflecting and looking at myself, and then by changing the lie. Right, the lie was that I wasn't loved, and I had to keep trying to earn it. I had to keep trying to prove it. And the thing about that lie is that I could have made all those people love me, and those people could have showed me love the way that I wanted them to, but then I just would have went and sought it. It's like I would have kept going to seek it somewhere else. And
Right.
so with that lie, I had to come to terms, and I had to really go to God's word and reflect and be in prayer and look at the people around me and accept that I truly, genuinely am loved, fully known. And another way, I'll say one more way that I think I did that, which I think is really helpful, because I know that there are a lot of trauma survivors that and parents who they are in the word with their children. And there are a lot of trauma survivors who they're trying to be in the word, they're going to church, but they're still not, that I am loved is still not like sitting deep in their
Yes.
souls and hearts. And
Yes.
so another thing that just really helped me uh, understand that is that, like, this is my job. I get to go speak over trauma survivors, over former foster youth, over adoptees, over kids who've been through really, really hard things, that they are genuinely loved, and that
Yeah.
God loves them and He is their safe place, and that they have a home in the kingdom of heaven. And I was doing that over and over and over again. And then I would go home and lay in bed, and I would literally think, like, in my brain, I was like, I hate myself. I hate myself. I'm a bad
Mm.
person. All these just terrible thoughts. And then at one point, it was like, why can I speak this over everyone else and believe it I believed it wholeheartedly for the kids that I was speaking to, but I didn't believe it for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of trauma survivors and a lot of people who've endured abuse. We believe it for our sister in Christ, we believe it for our neighbor. And if we can do that, if that love is accessible to them, then it's also accessible to us. It's accessible to you.
Hey, friends, do you ever feel overwhelmed by your family's schedule? Or do you ever feel like you finished the weekend and wish you had been more intentional with your family's time? We know that managing a family is rewarding, but it's hard work. If you are ready to transform your family time and make meaningful connections every week, I'm excited to introduce to you Christian Parenting's digital family meeting guide. Every week, your family will gather to plan the week ahead, talk about the highs and lows of the week, and focus your hearts on the Lord together. With 52 weekly guides and 12 monthly planning sheets, this resource makes it simple to organize your family time and deepen your relationships with each other and the Lord. So, the Family Meeting Guide includes weekly meeting guides with Bible verses, family check ins, and even a Kids' Choice section to keep things fun. It also includes monthly planning sheets to track goals, prayers, and appointments so that everyone is on the same page. And don't worry, you'll receive everything in your inbox ready to print or pull up on your phone. Life gets busy, but staying connected doesn't have to be complicated. The Christian Parenting Family Meeting Guide helps you stay organized, grow closer, and focus on what matters most. Because you're a listener of the Call to Love podcast, you can go and grab yours now for just $5. Make this the year your family grows in faith and connection. You can get your copy by heading over to cpgive.org today, and I'll have those links in today's show notes. Oh, that is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just the insight that you're able to provide, because you're right. We do stop at behavior when we look at a child, and we identify them with the behavior and not who we are, and that identity of a beloved child of God, and working to, and obviously there's a component of resilience that we I talk about a lot in the families that I serve, just in the work that I do. I mean, it's a commitment to love someone who is behaving in unlovable ways, but to hear your heart behind, listen, I was trying desperately to belong, to please, to seek love, to receive love. I didn't know how. That's a really challenging spot, because you're both fighting for the same goal, but you're fighting against one another in that sense. I mean, it's incredibly complex, and it's exhausting for everyone involved. So Tori, along those lines, just before you kind of had that aha moment, and I know that everybody kind of has those realization moments at different times, and it's the right time where the heart is cultivated and a word of truth can be spoken and it can be realized and received, and then change can result on the other side of it. But for those who are still in that stuck pattern, and for maybe parents specifically who are loving a child and seeking to love and embrace and connect with a child who is pushing away for the self-protection, the survival mode that you've talked about that we train a lot on, what advice do you have to keep going, to keep showing up, to keep showing love despite their protests, essentially through their behavior and their actions, their words?
Yeah, well, first let me say that so now my husband and I are foster parents, and I know that there are probably people on here who have read my first book, Fostered, and I wrote that book. I was like 22, 23, so we're talking like 6 years ago now.
Yeah.
And there are many things that I look back at that book and I think, oh, I might have said that a little bit differently now. Though I'm glad that I didn't write it now. I'm so happy that God allowed me to write that book then, because I think what it allows is it helps people see the perspective of someone who is literally just coming out of their trauma,
Right.
who is just processing these things at a young age. I mean, it was all so fresh.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad I wrote it when I did. I think it serves its purpose, and God has fulfilled what He wanted to fulfill through it. Um, However, I will say, being a foster parent now, I just have so much greater understanding for what I would, maybe one time have called shortcomings or failures of my foster parents. I would now call like absolutely doing the best with, like, they did the absolute best. Like, they were the best, but they had so many things, coming against them, whether that was, me not being able to accept love, or caseworkers, rules, policies, procedures. Like, there's
Yeah.
just so much that you don't know when,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things I wrote about in my first book, is that I wish that I did know that I wished I would have been in more meetings, that I would have, people would have helped me understand more about my case and what was
Yeah.
happening. And now, having more hindsight and being a foster parent, I understand that more. But all that to say, I think a lot of what, parents are trying to, foster parents and adoptive parents are trying to overcome, um, with all the resources that we have. I think a foster parent can do everything that they've been told, and you know, it is really only like the healing power of God, that is going to heal the child.
Yeah.
Um, with that, I do always say, you know, do not grow weary in doing good. For in due time, you will reap a harvest. And I think a lot of times with that scripture, we focus on the, you will reap a harvest, and we're looking at the harvest. But I think the words that we really need to focus on in that scripture is in due time. We don't
Yeah.
know what that time is, but in due time, we just have to hold on to that. In due time, it's going to happen. And when I look at the people who had the greatest impact on my life, they lived with integrity. They proclaimed the name of Jesus, they talked about his love, and then they actually reflected it. And I really do believe that that's the most compelling thing that we can do for foster children, but just any child that we have in our care.
Yeah.
Anyone who is watching us, we live with integrity. We practice what we preach, because people are absolutely, we are compelled by the word of God, but we are also compelled by the character of Jesus. And so when both of those things are aligned, I really think that's when kids, young adults' hearts begin to heal and move towards the heart of Jesus, so that it can heal even deeper.
Yes. Oh, I could not agree with that more. That is fantastic insight. Once again, I love being able to hear your perspective as one who lived life in that stuck pattern for a time, and then in hindsight now seeing it from the perspective of the foster parent. And I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm curious, and I'm going to ask you a loaded question, Tori, and feel free to answer this as you feel led, because it's kind of like the question. But why are destructive patterns such a stronghold? From your experience as a foster child, growing up, overcoming these patterns, and now loving children who are now sitting in the same place that you were, why is it such a stronghold?
Patterns are very subtle. Patterns are very sneaky. I think that the enemy loves to use patterns, to just bind us. And I don't think we realize that it is often patterns that are binding us, again, because they're so sneaky. They're just quiet. And that's because they're what we've always known. They're what we're
Yeah.
used to. They're actually oftentimes what we find comfortability in.
Yeah.
They're familiar. And so there has been psychological research that has actually shown that those who have grown up in dysfunction are 4 times more likely to enter into dysfunctional relationships. And a lot of times when we think that, we just think, oh, romantic relationships. But in my life, that happened with authority figures, friendships. Like, it was just churches. It was anything that was like dysfunctional. I was drawn towards, and in the research shows that people do that because it's where they find comfort.
Yeah.
It's where their brains, like, they can see like the wires and brains when there starts to be ease and comfort just go haywire. And
Yeah.
then when there's like haywire and chaos in life, that's actually where the brain finds comfort and ease.
Yes.
And so for trauma survivors, it's the opposite of what someone without trauma would, how they would function.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's why we get stuck in these patterns, because for trauma survivors, we don't even, like, we can be in chaos, we can be in dysfunction, and our brains literally aren't even interpreting it that way. For me, I was seeing, like I said, these relationships, rupture again and again and again. And I was also, I was really struggling with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. And when you're laying in bed and you're thinking about, ending your life day in and day out, and I've always been a journaler since I was like 12 years old. And then sometimes I would go back and I would look at these journals. And when I have a whole journal filled with suicidal ideation, I have to sit back and reflect, what's happening? What is causing this? Because when it's happening, I'm not even really um, computing that this is how broken my heart is and this is how broken my brain is.
Yeah.
It's because it's just happening to me.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so fortunate. I feel so blessed that when I was 12 years old, you know, foster children, they have usually like biannual court hearings, or sometimes it's every 3 months, but I was having one of those. And the judge actually mandated that I go to therapy. And I think, a lot of parents, they don't want to force their kids to go to therapy. I'm really thankful that I was forced to go to therapy.
Sure.
And it wasn't my parents. I think it's different when it's your parents forcing you to go than it was like a judge. Um, I was really thankful for that, though, because I felt like I got to learn how to process at a really young age. And now I have to communicate really hard things that have happened to me, and sometimes just hard things in general. And
Yeah.
I think that I'm able to do that now because I started it at such a young age, and I've been doing it ever since. And so now when parents are like, well, I don't want to force my kid to go to therapy, if they're in the foster care world, I'm like, blame it on the caseworker. Tell them that the caseworker is forcing them to go to therapy, or blame it on
Sure.
the judge. Like, just say it's your case, because they probably do. They probably do want the kid to go to therapy.
Yeah.
And then it's not falling on, breaking the relationship of the parent.
Yeah.
But then also, we have a foster daughter, and something we have a 16-year-old foster daughter, and something that we do with her is we let her choose her therapist. We let her scroll through Psychology Today, and we say, you choose her, who and what kind of therapy do you want. Ask the question, do you want art therapy, do you want play therapy, do you want talk therapy, do you want EMDR, and explain to them the different options they have.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes we're just like, you're going to therapy, you're going to a Christian therapist, and this is who you're going to.
Yeah.
And no wonder, how can we expect teenagers to want to do that?
Sure. Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. And I like what you're talking about as far as removing that power struggle for the sake of preserving relationship. And you're right. There's so many. Hopefully you're working with a team, ideally where you're unified with the caseworker and working through the case plan and all the different things going on where you can, refer back to and go, hey, we all feel like, but it can't be, you can pass the buck essentially and be like, that's the bad guy. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
But giving choice and all of that, I think is really, really great to preserve relationship and maintain that. I think that's really, really helpful. And you'd mentioned just the sneakiness of the patterns and how subtle they are and how it builds up over time. And I want to lean into that a little bit as we're talking about just indicators of destructive cycles, things that, our children come to us of all ages. Our child came to us as a newborn. That's not always the case. Some people assume, well, newborn means no trauma. Not the case.
Yeah.
Found that out very hard, but beginning to see indicators, destructive behaviors, that's obviously you can see that. But I would love for you to lean into just a little bit more and maybe help our parents understand things to watch for or be attuned to and pay attention to that might not be very blatant, visible indicators of these destructive patterns and cycles, so that intervention can take place sooner and more effectively.
The first thing that comes to mind is attachment. I am sure that I know that a majority of people listening to this are probably familiar with attachment. But for those of you who aren't, I think in the foster care world, we're like, I don't want to do it because I'm going to get too attached. And I don't mean like that kind of
Yes.
attachment. Attachment is a psychological term. It is a psychological theory that is incredibly insightful and interesting. And so I have looked into my own attachment styles, and doing that, reading those attachment styles, and seeing which one I identify with the most actually really helped me see why my relationships were turning out the way that they were at some
Yes.
points in my life. And so, especially when your kids are older, I think being able to actually just have them read, I think there's like 4 or 5, having them read the different ones and being like, hey, do you identify with this? And what do you see in me? Do you think I identify with any of these attachment things? And I think letting our kids sometimes have input into what they see in us is just it makes them feel like they have a voice in our
Yeah.
lives. It makes them
Yeah.
feel like they have something valuable to say, but also it helps them open up because they aren't feeling like they're the only ones that have to be fixed. And
That's good.
sometimes there have been times when my foster daughter has said things to me and I'm like, that's just not true. Like it's just not. And so everything that your child says to you, you don't necessarily have to receive, but that doesn't mean that it can't help you form a relationship with them, and have conversations with them that can lead to them understanding themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm a big proponent of, I think, as parents, I'm guilty of this myself. Like, I just want to give advice and I want to just tell everybody what to do. And I want to be in control because control makes me feel very safe.
Yep.
But what I think kids really, really just open up to and tend to lean into more is when you just ask them questions. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you ask them questions, you can lead them to the conclusion that you wanted to get to in the first place. And I know that those are all, definitely things for older youth, but I think attachment starts when you're a baby. And you can see those signs of disorganized attachment, insecure attachment, avoidant attachment in children from a very young age. And
Right.
so I think, when you are disciplining, when you are just spending time with your children, attachment is something that is always at the forefront of my mind, even with my biological kids. I'm always
Yes.
thinking, how can I form a secure attachment, where my children know that like I am here to fulfill their needs. And with that being said, I do have like, when it comes to foster parenting and parenting children, I don't know how I'm no parenting expert, and I don't know how this is going to turn out. But I do think there is a little bit of, this is going to be controversial in the foster care and adoption space. I do think there's a little bit of like babying that we do, with our children. And when I look back on my own childhood and my young adult and teen years, when I look at the caregivers that helped me, they always had very high standards for me. And
Mm.
they expected me to accomplish things. They expected me to raise to the bar. They didn't lower the bar, and expect me to fall to it.
That's right.
They lifted the bar up and expected me to rise to it. And I think that's something that we have kind of forgotten to do for kids in foster care because of their trauma.
Yeah.
We do a little bit of babying, and I think being trauma informed is very important. But I also think if we raise the bar, our kids will rise to it. If we lower the bar, our kids are going to fall to it. And so even though like you want to be trauma informed, you have to continue to keep high expectations for your kids, so that they can have high expectations of themselves.
Hey, sweet friend, do you have questions about adoption and foster care? This podcast is meant to be a resource for you, to help you in this calling which can be full of so many unknowns. We want to answer your questions, which is why in the show notes you'll find Summer's email, which is summercolbert@gmail.com, where you can submit your questions to Summer and let us know if we can share your questions or story here on the podcast, so other listeners can know that they aren't alone in their wondering and experiences. Again, that email is SOMERCOLBERT@gmail.com, or use the link below. You are not alone in this journey, sweet friend. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
I absolutely agree with that. And, I'm like, that should not be controversial, and I know you're right. It absolutely is. But I absolutely believe that I'd heard a pastor explain it one way, speaking to that, holding them capable. Like, you are capable of doing this. I believe
Yeah.
in you. You can do hard things, and
Yes.
speaking that into them and giving them the confidence as they build on their skill sets relationally and just in life in general. Absolutely. I think that is a very important point that we really couldn't lean into enough when it comes to how we approach this. Yes, we want to see them become overcomers. I was just having a conversation with Dr. Nicole Wilkie about this, and just this
Mhm.
resilience conversation of, yes, frame it in such a way where it's like, I believe in you and I'm walking alongside of you, but I can't do it for you. You are capable of doing this. Let me equip you. Let me show you, but you can do this. And so I completely agree with that. You had said something a minute ago I want to come back to as well, because I think this is a really probably not as often discussed facet of the foster care and adoption conversation when it comes to parenting, as though we come to the table. You talked about they're the only one in the household that feels like they have to be fixed.
Mm.
And the truth is, we're all broken in our households, and we're all on a journey, specifically to be refined and renewed in the Lord. And so going through this calling, experiencing and saying yes to this calling can actually trigger a lot in us that we didn't know was there. As the caregivers, as the parents, it brings out our own unresolved trauma. It brings out our own destructive patterns and cycles. And so now here we are trying to address the behavior as a result of our children, but then we're dealing with our own. So, how could or should parents address their own destructive cycles either prior to opening their homes and welcoming a child in, understanding that they are going to bring their own struggles and destructive pattern cycles? How should they address that and approach that? Or even while they're smack in the middle of, like, okay, I'm realizing that this is triggering me just as much as my child is triggered. How do you balance addressing all of that, serving your child and then wrestling that within yourself?
Yeah, having wise counsel in your life, that does they don't elevate you. They don't think you're one of a kind, so special because you're a foster parent. They just see you as an ordinary person. And
Yeah.
being able to go to those people and ask them, what do you see in me that I don't see in myself? You got
Mm,
to have those people who think you're ordinary in your life and who are
yeah.
willing to call you up and see the things that you may not see. And if you have people in your life, I think, parenting, there parenting, whether you're being a foster parent or adoptive, being a foster and adoptive parent is unique, but being a good parent is you can do that in a lot of different ways, and you can have a lot of different people speak into you in that way. But if you have foster and adoptive parents, of course, in your life as well, who have kind of went ahead of you, I think that is invaluable. My
Yeah.
husband and we are in a church that has been very involved in foster care and adoption since I was a kid. And so, if I'm struggling, I have people that I can talk to. I have community, and I have people that will say, I'm seeing this in you that you might not see in you. And I think that's so helpful. And another thing that I want to say is, you can prepare beforehand a lot, but nothing's going to prepare you like doing it.
That's true.
That is just
So
the
true.
reality. And even doing it, you just learn. You continually are learning. You're continually being broken open. Wounds are being rewounded. That is just the reality of foster care. I
Yeah.
will always say I want more people in the church to be involved. This is our responsibility.
Yes.
But I don't want to sugarcoat it that it's like some walk in the park. It
That's
is
right.
very difficult, and I have felt re-traumatized continually through it. Um, but I also believe that in due time, I will
Yeah.
reap a harvest.
Absolutely. That's so good. That's great advice. I love it. As we're wrapping up our conversation, I want to ask this question, because obviously we say yes to this calling because it's the Lord's will for our lives. It's what He has called us to do. And as we're talking about overcoming and breaking through these destructive and unhealthy patterns in our own lives and in the lives of our children who've experienced trauma, the ultimate goal is to point them to truth and the gospel. And so, how can we as Christian parents integrate healthy thought patterns in our daily interactions with our children for the purpose of breaking those unhealthy patterns, but really just reinforcing that biblical truth? What does that look like just in the day in and day out to sow those seeds to eventually see that harvest you're talking about?
Yeah. I think we can obviously speak life over our children. That's very obvious. But I think it goes back to what I said about, raising the bar high.
Yeah.
Our kids need to see that they are capable, that they are strong. All of our kids know that they're resilient. But if we just all know, I know I'm resilient. I know that I've been through it, and I know that I can keep going through it. But there is an amazing book called Grit. It's one of my favorite books, and the psychological researcher who writes that book says that the number one characteristic of a successful person is actually self discipline. And so, and when I look at my own life, I believe that's true. It's being able to do the thing when you don't want to do it. It's not being able to. I mean, I think resilience. The other thing, like grit, the way she describes it, is like discipline and resilience connected.
Yeah.
Um, and all foster youth have that resilience. They can push through and keep going and adapt with trauma and triggers. That's what resilience is. But many of them, fail to have that discipline. And so I think we have to instill that in them, whether that is through, and I'm again, I'm like, maybe this is, I know like travel sports and things are controversial, but like they need to be in sports. They need to have an instrument. Like they need to play an instrument, or they need to have a job. In our home, the rule is that you have to play an instrument, or you have to have a job, or you have to be in a sport. And especially with teenagers, because it keeps them busy, it keeps them out of trouble, and it keeps them disciplined. You have to go to work, you have to be on time, you are accountable to someone, you are expected to perform at at least a decent level. And I personally think that has create, especially for teenagers, it creates a sense of I have purpose, I am capable, I am good at something. Our foster daughter, she works at a fast food place, and her manager will, like, one time we went on like a week vacation and we took her, and the manager called me and she was like, "Is she leaving?" She was like, and I was like, "No, she's not leaving. We're just going on like this vacation thing." And she was like, "Good, because she's my favorite employee." And
Oh,
like,
wow.
that's not like, it's not because she's this perfect kid. It's because we have raised the bar super high for her, and we say these are our expectations of you, and we're not going to be getting calls from your work saying you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And if you do, there's going to be consequences. And I will say the same for me. I was an athlete, and the expectations of me were very high. People set high goals for me, and they believed in me. We have to believe good, high, purposeful things for our kids, and because and we have to put them in that. So because what it happens is they're proving it to themselves, right? They're not proving it to us. They're proving it to themselves. And this idea is very common in, like, when there's this book called, I think it's called The Tale of the Tiger Mom, and it's like Asian parenting. Very common in Asian parenting. They set the bar super high, and they love their kids and they care for them, but they also have a lot of discipline in their kids' lives, because they believe that that's like how they respect their kids. They believe that it's so good of them that they can reach these high goals, and the kids look at that as, oh, my parents respect me, my parents honor me.
That is really cool. I love that. I know I said I'm wrapping up, but I got to ask you this question because I feel like this is going to represent a lot of our listeners. And I actually have a good friend who's going through this right now. For the parent who is loving a child that's like, I am not ready to break free from this. I'm going to run from you. I'm going to fight. I'm going to give up. I'm going to do everything I can to get kicked out of your home, to get fired from the job, to break my instrument, sabotage the sport, whatever that is, because, that's a part of the destructive cycle that we're kind of talking about. What advice do you have for those parents?
Yeah, well, first there has to be consequences to those actions. I think we're all like, just keep being there, just keep loving, of course. Like, but when we think of our relationship with God, He is so graceful, He's so loving, but there are consequences to sin,
Yeah.
and so if there has to be consequences, whatever your child sees as a reward or sees as fulfilling. You know, if they're breaking an instrument, or they're like, I'm not doing this, or I'm not going to work, okay, well then you're probably not going to be on your phone, or you're not going to have a phone period, or you're not going to go to friends after school. And I know that puts a lot more stress and weight on the foster parent and on the adoptive parent.
Yeah.
But I do, in what I've experienced, is that I think that those consequences create expectations of just what the child is meant for and what they're capable of. And then the other thing is, it is sticking around. If you can, I always say, there are some situations you can't stick around because it's not safe.
Right.
And I don't think anybody should feel bad for that. But if a child is safe, if a youth is safe, we stick around and we say, we love you, but we're not going to accept. I know that you're better than this. I know that I expect more of you. And continuing to just keep that standard high. Another thing is, when I look at my track coach, I have so much love and admiration for him. And I have so much love and admiration for him because he believed in me, because he believed in me when no one else would. He had goals for me when I didn't even have goals for myself. And so when we, our job as parents, and I think we really can get stuck in this as, and I have to tell myself this because I want to be loved. But as a parent, I'm not here to be loved. I am here to make you the best adult that you can possibly be. I am here to make you a disciple, and I am here to help you fulfill the purpose that God has on your life. And that is usually done through discipline and learning. And you very well may not love me through it. And I think that's really hard as parents, especially as foster and adoptive parents, when we don't feel loved by these children that we love so much, that we've sacrificed so much for. But I think if we stay steady in the hard, like my track coach did, what happens is our kids look back. They have a life that is rewarding. They're good at something. They have some kind of purpose, and they look back and they say, "Oh, that's why they were so hard on me." That's what and that's how I look at I'm like, "Oh, that's why they were so hard on me. That's why they raised the bar super high. That's why they never let up." I'm grateful for that.
So good. Oh my goodness. Tori, thank you so much just for being willing to share your story and just the insights that you have come to realize. It's so helpful for those of us who it gives hope. I guess I will say it that way. And calling us to that higher standard. And it is so, so important. And you're right, not often talked about enough. So guys, the book is Breaking Patterns That Break You, Healing from Pain of Your Past and Finding Real Hope That Lasts. Tori, how can they connect with you further, learn more about the work that you do, and get a copy of the book?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram. I do Facebook and TikTok. If you do that, it's Tori Hope Petersen is my handle. Petersen is S-E-N, not S-O-N. If you're typing it in and you can't find me. And you can get the book anywhere books are sold, and it releases on February 4th, but you can pre-order it before that. And I'd so appreciate it if you could.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Guys, I'll have those links in today's show notes, and I would encourage you just to lean into this girl. She's amazing, as you have come to understand, just a wealth of knowledge and experience. And so, my friend, just blessings on you as you continue to do the hard work, and just thank you so much for being willing to minister to our families today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.